fun yesterday, and it's of course always so difficult to wake up and get yourself to the lecture after the party. That's why we kept our great speaker for today to try to wake you up with always fresh ideas. Henrik Lund is with us since the beginning of this conference, and I personally really enjoy this relationship of slowly building ideas how to do the energy transition. He is a very highly ranked researcher. He is also a member of Danish Academy of Technical Sciences. He's on the Stanford list in top 2. He was for 16 years editor-in-chief of Energy and founding editor of journal Smart Energy, 2 very important journals in our family of partner journals. And now he is going to be editor-in-chief of one new journal, but I'm not sure am I allowed to say it. But he's staying active. He has also authored many books, and one of those books is the one that we give as present to best authors. So not to extend my talk too much, I think people are mostly coming in. I would like to invite Henrik.
Thank you, Neven. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And I'll see if I can put on the slides here. Yeah, there. Great, good. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity here to make this keynote. I call it Smart Renewable Energy Systems in the Era of Climate Neutral Societies, and I will explain a little bit why. But first, I'll just show you a little slides of where I'm coming from, Aalborg in the northern parts of Denmark. It's a university located in the middle of a green transition going on. And I think most of you already know Denmark from all the wind turbines we have, and a lot of you also from all the district heating. We are crazy with district heating in Denmark, but I just showed this slide here to highlight that there's also some very interesting development going on within gas. Actually now 40% of the Danish natural gas supply we used to and still drill for gas in the North Sea and do natural gas, but 40% of that is now replaced with biogas, green gas. And that's a recent development, and that came a little bit as a surprise to me, even that we are so far, and our idea is to go for 100% by decreasing the demand and not burning natural gas in individual boilers, because that's the waste of energy, as most of you know here, and then increasing the production of, so we hope we can reach the 100% soon. That said, then more into the top of that, our address here is based on the new version of my book. It's the 3rd edition. And I'll just make a little commercial here for it in the beginning. I know I wrote this book many, many years ago, the 1st edition, and then it goes like this. When you published a book, then after some years, the publisher will call you and say, Henrik, your book is not selling very well any longer. And then they have a solution to that, and the solution is, Henrik, if you add 20% more, then we can sell it to the same audience once again. And then they called me also a couple of years ago. Now it's not selling so well any longer. So Henrik, you have to do the 3rd edition and add 20% more. So I did that. And now you all know what you expected to do, right? Good. So, but I'll just say a little bit about the book. Because from the very beginning, this book is actually addressing 2 things at the same time. 2 things that align very well with the discussion we have had in the previous keynotes of Lone and Stefan in the previous days here, where we have been discussing how much should we put into the models. What is the idea of making all these models? And what's more discussions around the models with awareness and all the other things that was addressed here. I'll just say a little bit about that in the beginning. Because actually in the book I address two topics at the same time, but the reason why these two different topics are put into the same book is because I think they are working very, very much together. The one topic I'm addressing in the book is how for us as engineers and economists for that matter, how to design future energy systems for the green transition. What to look for and how can we design the most doable, technically reliable and affordable solutions to that from a modeling point of view. That's one topic in the book. The other topic is how should we as societies discuss and debate if we should do the green transition and how we should do it and how fast and what to do with all the path dependency and all the wasted interest and all these sort of things. So it's actually a dual there. And my point in the book is that we need for a good discussion on how as a society to change and do the green transitions, we need input. We need that input from the modeling in order to be making very good debates and discussion. And just to follow up a little bit on the previous day's talk, just to take an example. And here we'll take the example of the debate we have in Denmark right now, and that is on photovoltaic. How much should we have and where should we have it? And is this aligned good with people that should look at all this photovoltaics and so on and so forth? I guess this debate is in many countries right now. And the way I see it, we can, as modelers and energy system analysis, we can make studies on how we could design future green transitions. How many wind turbines should we have? How many PV? How many district heating pipes? And all the many, many, many technologies. How we can do that, also make hourly investigation of how will the PV fit in and so on. And we did that in Denmark. We did it, many others did it also. So we can put that on the table, and there we can sort of provide the information. How much PV should we have from a reasonable point of view? How much will fit very well into the system? And we gave that number, and we reached the number 10 gigawatt in our studies some years ago. And then, of course, the politician can start making decisions, and they also did that in Denmark. They made a decision that we should quadruple the electricity production from PV and wind onshore because that's the fastest and the most affordable to do. That was a political decision made. Out of that political decision, then there were also made frameworks on how to invest and make business cases. And a lot of these business cases ended up putting a lot of PV on the fields. And now there are so many projects want to put PV on the fields that the Danish Energy Agency could estimate that we will end up with maybe 40 gigawatt. And our peak load in Denmark is 6 gigawatt. So this is a lot. And it's 4 times more than we advocated when we did our investigation. But that's where we are right now. And then all these projects are now being developed. And then suddenly people that are neighbors to this discover, wow, they're really building a lot of PV in my neighborhood. Now we also have elections for the municipalities and so on. So this is a very heavy debate going on in Denmark right now. And people have started calling these fields with PV for iron fields. And that's not a very nice work to put on your field, being a neighbor to that. So that is the debate we have now. Now, what can we provide as scientists to that? Well, we already did, and now we are promoting that number. That is not something we could design in our energy system models, but we have good fellow researchers in our group that can also do geographical information system, and they could use their model to identify where can we put it. Can we put it on the roofs, the small houses or the big houses? We have a lot of big houses with big roof. Most countries have that. And they could actually calculate that the amount of PV that we found suitable in order to be integrated could actually be on the big roofs in Denmark. We have roofs enough for that. So that's something we can provide in. It does not necessarily have to be on the fields. We could also put it on the roofs. The problem with the roof right now is that there's a lot of barriers, so there's no business cases in it. And you can also claim that will cost more money. But then again, we can go back to our energy system analysis models and calculate, does it really mean anything in the broader picture? And actually, when we did design this from the very beginning, we actually were focusing on the big roofs. So we already put those numbers in. Yes, it costs a little more money, but not that much. And there will also be something to be saved, because on the big roofs, under the big roofs, there's very often a big building. In a big building, there's very often a big electricity consumption, which means you already have the grid. While on the open field, you have to build the grid, and that costs a lot of money also. So maybe it's not so much more expensive. That is information we can provide into the political discussion. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is, should we as modelers try to embed that political discussion into our models? As Stefan put it, from the citation from Meadows from the 70s and so on, should we put that human into the model? Personally, I think, no, we should not do that. It's so important we have these political discussions, and what we can do is provide evidence and input and so on for them, but we should never try to capture them into our models. We should keep them open, and we should also engage ourselves in those debates. Just to mention this here from the beginning, that's how I see it. And I always sometimes said this one-liner when people ask me, Henrik, we are scientists that look into the future. Please tell us how the future will be. I once made a presentation to the Danish Energy Agency where I underlined, well, the future is man-made. It's not something that is given to us. It's something we do ourselves. And personally, I'm not in the business of predicting the future or capturing the future and deciding in models how the future should be. I'm in the business of discussing the future. And I think what I would like to do with all my modeling is provide input for a proper political discussion on how our future should be. Let's just stay here from the beginning to make you curious to read more in my book. But the rest of what I'm going to say here is only addressing, or mostly addressing, the one half of the book, the one half in which I try to develop how can we find the best solution, what should we look for during the best solutions. And then I will also come back to some new inputs, both from the book, also from some studies we made after the book was published, and also, if I have the time, I hope I have, some very, very recent results that are so recent they have not even been published yet, at least just to keep you staying for the end. Okay, well, I say the era of climate neutral societies, that is because this is how we have now are discussing it over the past 5, maybe 10 years. We've been looking at this. All our political goals are looking for climate neutral. This is different from how it was years ago, and also when we started discussing all this in these conferences here. So I'll just take a very short historical look on how we have been debating it until now, and why we are in a different situation now. I mean, this here is from 2005, some of the discussion presentation I made in the previous conferences. There we are discussing how to do sustainable development, how to find out how renewable energy fits into the system, and also underlining the system that this also will have to be aligned with energy efficiency, both in the demand side as well as in the production side with district heating and the like. And also we have this sort of flexible technologies to link it all together. Then later on, we started talking about 100%, go the full Monty, not only integrating renewable energy, but designing energy systems based on 100%. And then later on, in recent years, then we've sort of also opened our eyes and see all the politicians, they're talking about climate neutral societies to decarbonize the societies. And when we do that, of course, we have to look broader than just the energy system. Then the energy system is part of a broader issue where also agricultural and industrial processes and other things that add to the climate change also have to be considered. And my point is, this is a different ballgame. Then we can not only focus on the renewable energy, then we have to lift our eyes, and also we have to put other design criteria into what we do when we try to find doable and affordable solutions to all this. No matter if it's the one or the other word we put to it, still the way we work with it, and most of you here in the conference work with this, is that we do modeling. We put all the energy systems into models, and then we change them and look into the future and see if we can design something doable. As you may all know, I guess, at Aalborg University we are using this model here that is a freeware, so everybody can download it and use it, and many have done that. Then using this over and over again for different countries, and also for Denmark again and again, then you also develop a thinking, you also an understanding on what to look for. And one of the very, very important things we have been highlighted many times is that we cannot find the best solution if we look in individual subsectors. It's only when we take a holistic approach and combine these subsectors we are able of finding the good solutions. That's something we have been promoting, many of you here in the conference, as well as the smart energy systems approach. And the model we have designed specifically to be able to do that. So it's a fast model that can do fast journeys into the future, in which we really highlight the different synergies between the sectors, and also calculate all the sectors and our hourly durations and so on and so forth. We also know why it is. There are several reasons. I would just highlight one here that you have probably heard me say before, but I think it's very fundamental for what we do and why it's so urgent to do this coherency when we analyze the systems. And that is the simple fact that there is a huge, and I underline a huge, significant price difference between what it costs to store energy depending on what type of energy we wish to store. And this slide here, we compare the cost of storing 1 unit of electricity, no matter if it's a battery or pumped hydro storage, or it's going to hydrogen and back, or whatever technology we use. Such technology will cost in the order of magnitude 100 times more than it costs to pay access to a storage in which we can store 1 unit of thermal energy. And that's 10 times more than 1 unit of gaseous fuels, and 10 times more than 1 unit of liquid fuels. Here it's some oil tanks are put on the picture, but that could also be filled with methanol or green jet petrol or whatever in the future. This actually gives a factor 10,000. I repeat, a factor 10,000 between if we wish to store electricity, or we can do it in other ways. And of course, if we can design the system so that we can store things in the affordable way and don't corner ourselves into storing it in the expensive way, then we can do so much more. When I first made this slide together with David Connolly many years ago now, maybe 15 years ago or long ago, I was thinking to myself, of course there will be some development in batteries. And many times I showed the slide, there will always be one person say, yes, but we will develop the batteries and they will decrease in cost and so on. I just made a little check here recently because in Denmark there are many of these developers of PV and wind in the same location that will also add a battery. So I asked them, what are your expected cost on that battery, both the CAPEX and the OPEX and so on? And I got some, and this is projects being designed now. And they actually reached the conclusion that it will cost the double of the number I use for the future. And even if we can decrease that to half, that's what I'm using, and even halving again, there's still a factor 50 to thermal energy. So this is really a major thing, and it determines how we can find the doable and best solutions. Well, in my book already, in the second edition, I added this chapter on smart energy system where I discussed the definitions. Already many years ago, this thing about smart grid came into the debate, and I showed here that all the definition of smart grid ends with that it's electricity we are discussing and not the rest. There's also being others that then try to be smart grid in not only the electricity grid, but also the district heating and so on and so forth. And based on that, we designed definitions, scientific definitions to what I then worded as smart electricity grid and smart thermal grids and smart gas grids. And on top of that, we defined the smart energy systems. The smart energy system is having a focus on making synergies across all the smart subsectors and identify the best solutions to that. We also published and gained a hole in the literature using this expression. And as part of that, we also looked at the future district heating system and developed the thinking of fourth generation district heating into the future. And the idea here is that because things are changing, also district heating must change. As we put it, district heating is here to stay, but district heating must change. It must adapt to the new circumstances, and that's some of the things. Now, district heating is important in Denmark. In other countries also district cooling, so there's also a parallel to district cooling for other countries. This was just repeating some old stuff. Now we are going into the recent things that we have been looking at. And in the new book, I put a little more theoretical formulation to the things I just mentioned here. And then I also elaborate on what it means that we are in this era of climate neutral society thinking, and that's our political games. And then by the end, I'll also illustrate some new studies we have that can also illustrate why it is so important that we take this holistic view when we design the future. First, I put two theses in the book trying to express what I just mentioned here. And the one is saying what I just said, namely that if we are looking for the best technical, reliable, affordable, doable solutions, we must take a holistic cross-sectoral approach. We cannot find those solutions within the individual subsectors. So that's necessary for the reason I just mentioned. Then I also had another thesis that has to do with if I look only at Denmark and some of you look only at another country, or in Denmark I look only at one municipality, or even recently we looked just at Aalborg University, what should our role be? Then very often you tend to define the role of a municipality, for example, or a country, that is to decarbonize as fast as you can with the resources you have. And so you put goals up, we should do this and that. But I argue we should turn the question a little bit around, because we're all different. And it doesn't make any sense that one municipality in Denmark do green transition if not the rest is also doing it? And it doesn't make a lot of sense we do it in Denmark unless Sweden and all our neighboring countries, and by the end of the day, the whole world is doing it. So it's not actually a matter of doing it yourself, but it's a matter of playing your role in the overall puzzle. It's a matter of identifying what you should do in your country or your municipality to fit in so that we can all do it. And that's a slightly different ballgame if you formulate it this way. I persuade both the national studies we have done to do that and a lot of municipality studies to apply this thinking. The most difficult part, and I'm still working on that, is to persuade Aalborg University also to conduct this thinking here. But let's see if that might happen or not. Anyway, just to put a little bit of a case, and this case is in the book, and it's also mentioned many times in this conference. It's a study we made together with the Danish Association of Engineers, and there we have done this study for many times, starting back in 2006, but then when we did it here for around 5 years ago, we were a little more explicit on expressing what we're doing and also expressing these guidelines here of being a smart energy system, so we could design a smart energy solutions for Denmark. And the guideline we sort of formulated, that is simple, but when you have it, it's really, really useful, and it also hinders that you go into some wrong direction. And the guideline is simple. It is to design what should we do in Denmark so that it fits into that the rest of the world by the end of the day is doing the same. Because you can do the green transition in many ways. You can import bioethanol from Brazil or this and that, but we cannot all do that. We have to do something that fits into the rest. It's a very, very good guideline to have, no matter if you're a country or municipality. The first thing we asked ourselves is what to do with international aviation and shipping. And there we found out that when we define our national goals in Denmark, and I think it's the same for any country, then we align ourselves with the UN definition of what is the climate emissions in Denmark, and international aviation and shipping is not included. That is in another box. And if we all solve that problem without solving the common problem, then we have not solved any problems. So that's the first thing we say: we must include the Danish share of international aviation and shipping in our solution. Otherwise, we cannot do it in a way where we all can meet the goal together by the end of the day. The next is, what about biomass? How much biomass can we include in Denmark in our efforts and still call it sustainable? And here we ended up answering that question saying, well, there is amount of biomass in the world, and some of it's sustainable, then we likely come into a gray area, and at some point we come into a very black area in which the biomass is not sustainable any longer. What we say is we should be able to do it in Denmark within what is our share of what is sustainable biomass in the world. Very much knowing that this is for debate, and we also engage ourselves in that debate. And in my view, I mean, the future is man-made. This is not an absolute figure. This is something that also depends on what we do. And we also have some suggestions here to do something so we can actually have more sustainable biomass in Denmark. And then there's also the whole thing about flexibility, and then there also we come to the conclusion that in Denmark we should provide our share to what to do in Europe when the wind and the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing enough for the whole of Europe. We should not solve that individually. We should exchange mutual benefit and so on. By the end of the day, we should also give our contribution to that. And of course, also if there are too much PV and wind. And then we came up with this conclusion here where we also looked at what about the other sectors. It's not energy. Energy is large in Here we see the carbon dioxide or the climate contribution measured in carbon dioxide equivalents. And of course, the energy sector, the big blue one there is big now, and we're doing a lot about it. But when we come to the climate neutral, there will be sectors such as agriculture and industrial processes that we cannot bring to a zero. At least that's our view of it. Which means that by the end of the day, we need to compensate that if we wish to become climate neutral. And that's sort of one of the framework conditions for us when we design it. So we have to take that into consideration. And this is the suggestions we have on doing that within the limits of only using the Danish share of sustainable biomass and also including the Danish share of international aviation and shipping. And then, of course, we can come to conclusions like this. We all know them, diagrams here where we put in some wind and some biomass and so on, and then we, in this Sankey diagram, go all the way through and need our demands in the end. But what we also found, because this is not only an issue of energy, this is also an issue of carbon. But so we also started making diagrams like this, what to do with the carbon flows. And we have this dilemma, I mean, in the carbon neutral future, we will be in lack of carbon because we need the carbon. We need it for a couple of reasons. I mean, one of them, we need it as an energy carrier. Otherwise, it's very difficult to carry the hydrogen and the renewable energy into the aviation, for example. We also need it for capture to compensate, and therefore it's really interesting to look in the carbon flow. And this is also what we're doing. Some of my good colleagues are doing right now is implementing this calculations into the energy plan model, so we can also do it internally in the model. Here it's done outside. I mean, the results are hopefully the same, but then it's a little more convenient also to develop that. So that's an issue, not only to look at the energy, but also to look at the carbon. Now, one thing we found that I'll highlight here, and we also made a presentation together with Nevin and Luca and your people a couple of years ago, and you also mentioned it in the opening speech, is that the electricity demand in the future will change. Here I illustrated the blue one, I call it non-flexible. That is basically the electricity demand we have today in all the industry and houses and so on and so forth. And when we look into the future, we'll have much, much larger electricity demand because we get all these new demands. But I will claim they are flexible. The orange here is power to heat, the gray is the electric vehicles, and the yellow one is the power to X. I will say all scenarios in Denmark looks like this. There's of course variations depending on who make them, how much and how little, but the picture is the same. So what we did in collaboration also, we simply took out, I mean, the thing here is that we do not only have to build all the wind turbines and the PV to cover our current demand, we have to build many, many, many more to cover also the future additional demand for all the electrification. And here we just took out the variation of production from wind and PV and lined it up hour by hour, and then we compared it to the non-flexible demand. And reaching the same conclusion that Nevin made in the first day's presentation, that we almost covered hour by hour. I mean, we can cover the non-flexible demand hour by hour here, except for 7% now. This is a scenario, let's say 5 to 10% or something like that. That's order of magnitude, and that's not a difficult thing to solve. And when we talk about all this Dunkelflaute and stuff like this, our suggestion is whenever we calculate, the most simple way to do it and the most doable way to do it, and it doesn't really matter in the end, this is simply to build some gas engines or gas turbines and feed them with some green gas. And it doesn't matter that they're not very efficient because they don't have to operate very long. But it matters that the capex is low because they have to be very big. So that's the way to solve this. But there's another point that I would like to highlight here, is that this actually also illustrates, and maybe I can go back to the other one, that illustrates a shift in paradigm on how we should think electricity supply now compared to the future. I mean, now we have a demand, and we used to satisfy that demand by some power stations and now some wind turbines and so on. And we have to adjust the production to the demand because we cannot really change the demand on the hourly duration. But in the future, it'll be much more affordable to change the demand than it will be to change the production. So instead of trying to make the wind turbines operate when the wind is not blowing by a battery or something like that, it's much more doable to switch on and off the charging of the electric vehicles or the heat pumps and electric heaters or the electrolysis. And it's by far more affordable to invest that little extra money it takes to have higher capacities and more storage, because it's much more affordable storages compared to if we were trying to do the old regime on the future situation. I think that's a very important thing, and it also have to do with, if we take, sorry, I look upon it again here, it's also have to do with this sector coupling. Because now, because we have all this power to heat, power to electric vehicle, power to electrolysis, or power to X, or what we call it, because we have that, then we also get the option of not storing the wind and PV while it is electricity. We can wait until we have converted it to thermal energy or gas or liquid fuel or whatever, and then it's so much more affordable to do it. So that's important. There are some papers illustrating this, and it's also a chapter in the book. Now I will try to say the same thing in another way by a new study we made after the book was published. And again, trying to communicate how important it is, how we design our study of the future. And here again, we use the same scenario I just introduced to you. And what you see here is the flows. We have some energy sources. They go into some energy carriers, and then we supply some energy end use. But next to that, we also have the carbon flow that is sort of, in the philosophy, equal. We also have some carbon sources. We convert them into some carbon carriers, and by the end of the day, we also use them for some, you can say, end use, even though some of these end use are circular because it's CCU, so we recycle the same carbon. So that's the scenario we use as a framework to do the analysis. And then we made an analysis, and we defined some, we call them smart energy systems integration levels, just to call them something. And we defined 5 of them. And we start with, if we only look at the electricity sector on its own, as we used to do in the smart grid era or approach, or if we add one more level of sector integration, that is adding the thermal sector, district heating in Denmark, or heating, but also cooling in other countries, and of course also cooling in Denmark. And then as a next step, adding the domestic transportation. And then as a next step, adding also the international aviation and shipping transportation. And then we also added, just to go one step more, material, because we also need carbon for material in the future. And the idea here is to show, if we only look at the electricity sector, the only option we have is a battery or an electricity storage somehow. If we include the thermal sector, then we also have the benefit of a thermal storage. If we include the aviation and stuff, then we also have the benefit of using gaseous storage and liquid fuel storage. And then we can see what that changes. Then based on this, we made some analysis. I just have to explain them a little bit clear here. So first we take the first integration level. This is where we look only at the electricity sector. And then we say to the beginning, The one that is noted here, no storage, the first row in this. And then we say we have an electricity demand, we build all the wind turbines and PV, we need to do that. So we can just cover it. And of course, when we analyze that on an hourly, then some of this electricity cannot be used because there's no demand in those hours and so on. And then we have other hours in which there's not enough wind and PV. And there we have to produce something. And here we assume we will produce it on a power station fueled with some kind of biomass or biofuel or green biogas. And as you can see here, this means that we will have not balanced electricity demand, and then we will have a lot of consumption in biomethane. We don't need any storage, and we have no cost for balancing. But we can easily see that the biogas limits here are not within the limits of what is sustainable biomass. And then we take a next calculation. Now we say, now we put storage. We put flexibility and storage on it until we have a total balance. And now you can see we have a total balanced electricity supply. We have no fuel consumption because it's all balanced. But we have a very, very, very high storage. And we also have a very, very high cost because the storage costs so much money. So we say, now we'll try to keep ourselves within the biomass share that is doable, that is sustainable, and then we can do a little better, as you can see here, but still there are a high need for storage, and also there is a high cost for doing that. And then by finally we say, now we will wish to find the least cost solution, the optimal solution, because we do not necessarily have to do everything with storage. We could also build more wind turbines or more PV, and then we can just throw it away, and sometimes that's cheaper because the storage is so expensive. So we are identifying an optimal solution here. So you can see there are very, very less cost to that, but then we will build many, many more wind turbines and PV that we actually need, and then we'll just throw away a lot of electricity. And then we repeat this calculation for all the different system integration levels. And then by the end of the day, we put together all the optimal solutions for these integration levels. And this is where we then gain the interesting information. And the information on the first one is that the excess, the amount of electricity that we throw away in the least cost solution really decreases a lot the more we have an integrated system. And the reason for that is that we identify much more doable storage options. In the only thing we can do is electricity storage, and it's very expensive. But in the next, we can do thermal storage, and by the end of the day, we can also do liquid fuel and gaseous storage that is much more affordable. And then an interesting thing is, and this is also interesting because we should also be careful if we only take some middle steps, only integrate two sectors, that we not, for example, in this case, end up building too much thermal storage, because there will be even better options than that in the future as we see it. But then also when we look at the balancing cost, and now the balancing cost is calculated that there are some costs and some benefits. The cost, of course, is to invest in the storage and the additional wind turbines or whatever in the optimal solution. But the benefits is that we can use more of the electricity and don't have to throw it away. And then we can balance this. And the interesting thing here is that coming from a situation in which balancing is a problem that costs a lot of money, then we actually come into a situation in which the balancing is a profitable business case to make. By adding this balance, then we actually decrease the total cost of the energy system. We do not increase it, and that's interesting. And but again, and that's the point here, of course, we can only find that solution if we take the integrated approach. We cannot find it in the individual subsectors. And another interesting thing is, how much storage do we need? I mean, the upper here, I've shown the storage we already have in Denmark. We have, of course, tanks for oil and liquid fuel. We have gas storage. We have thermal storage. We have some EV batteries. And then in the future, what do we need? we need almost the same. We need a little more for the EV batteries, but that's because we are having more EV cars, so that's just equivalent to that. And then we need some hydrogen storage, and then we also need some thermal storage that is actually more. But all this type of storage is doable and affordable and will not cost a lot of money. So as I see it, it's a doable thing to do this. There's a lot of benefits. And those benefits comes from identifying the future situation heading for the climate neutral society. It's because we have that goal, we identify the framework in which we have to include these things that then have the additional benefit. If we analyze it all in a proper way, we can also identify very doable and suitable solutions. So the main point here is that taking the smart energy system approach allow us to find better solutions. And if we do that in the context of climate neutral societies, it defines a whole new paradigm for our solution, and we can also identify very, as you can see here, affordable storage solutions to the balancing problem. Now time is running, but I'll just show a little not yet published results. I'll do it very, very, very briefly. And it also aligns with the discussion we had in the panel debate on Tuesday with nuclear. And very often we discuss the LCOE, the average cost of electricity production, where we compare different technologies, and we all know the results. Nuclear is very expensive, and solar and wind is very affordable now, and even more affordable than the fossil fuels. That's how the average cost is in most analyses. But then some people argue, yes, but wind and PV have this balancing problem. And as people sometimes put it, nuclear is a stable entity. So there are additional benefits there. Can we include them? And then some people have developed, they had different names. Here we put it as a system. Levelized cost of energy. So we put a system on it. So there are some system costs. Can we add them somehow? And the important thing here is that an LCOE is only depending on the technology, while a system LCOE is depending both on the technology and the context and the energy system in which it is embedded. So it makes no sense to calculate it unless you define the system you put it into. And what we try to show here on the next slide is that it actually matters. On the first here, we try to calculate this again with all this hourly modeling and all the things I mentioned before. And then we sort of calculate the LCOE, that is the blue one, and then we add some system costs on top of it, given certain assumptions. On the first slide here, the assumption is that we only take this electricity sector, electricity owner. That's the system we embedded into. On the next slide, you will see what happened if we take the climate neutral system. But now let's just look at the electricity only system here. And also, we calculated, as you very often see, in technology by technology. And in this case, no surprise, PV in a Danish case is having a lot of system cost because the sun is only shining, and it's actually rarely shining in the summertime, and that's why it's nice to be in Dubrovnik. But it is shining mostly in the summer and never in the night and the day and so on. So it really takes a lot of effort, especially in an electricity-only system, to build all the storage that can carry that PV production in summer times to the winter time and cover the demands there. So that's why it is so high. But we also try to calculate a least cost mix of it, and then we also calculated a least cost mix of with the sustainable biomass restriction. But anyway, let's take a look at that, and then I'll shift, and then we go into the climate neutral society context. And here, first of all the system costs are much lower because this system here have a much better ability to integrate the system, so it's much lower. And also, again, the lowest cost, the least cost we get is not when we do it individually only on one technology, it's when we mix the technologies. Now the nuclear cost is still so high that will never come into that mix, but the optimal mix will be PV and offshore and onshore wind in the Danish case. So again, just to make this point here, it matters if we put it into the one context or the other. It also matters if we only look at one technology or we design a package of technologies. And if we really identify the best solution, then they are by far much more affordable and doable than the others. We can also break down all the system costs. I'll not do that now. I'll just add to the important news the three items I already mentioned, the fourth-fair, that the combinations of PV and wind, and of course, again, emphasizing that the system matters when we do these things. Now I'll just say thank you very much for your patience. I think you've been really patient with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik, for excellent lecture as always. I will use opportunity to ask first question. Well, it works for Denmark for sure, but we have people here from 68 countries. 5 billion people are living in Sunbelt. There is no heating in Sunbelt. There is cooling, but cooling is coinciding with solar. There is industrial heat. Okay. Can we store industrial heat? There are electric cars. But important thing is that sun is shining all year similarly. So when you think about smart energy systems in the Sunbelt, for these 5 billion people, how would it go? Which way? What do you think?
I hope you can answer that question yourself, Nevin, because you have been investigating it more than me. But I'll just say that the principal guidelines here and the theoretical things I say here about how to identify the study is the same all over. But of course, the results will differ depending on the situations. So the results here regarding how much PV will definitely, very likely be higher in those regions than there will be in Denmark. But still, the whole idea of how to combine it, I am pretty sure that that will be valid anywhere on the globe.
I'm happy with the answer. And opening the floor for questions. Questions? We have one question there. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Marnoch Hamilton-Jones, AEE, Institute for Sustainable Technologies in Austria. Thank you for the very interesting lecture. A lot of the underlying assumption behind your call for us to think about how we can design our renewable systems to fit into the global context is that there are the political systems in place to enable that. Given the current geopolitical climate and the trajectory of geopolitics at the moment, are you optimistic?
To answer your straight question there, I was born an optimist. It never changed. So I am an optimist. But I'll also say, when you say it's an assumption behind what I do, that those political systems would be there, no. That's what I tried to say in the beginning. I'm in the business of discussing. And I mean, I would very much like to discuss with anyone, also in other countries, how to do this and how necessary it is that we do it. And the way I see it is that we can make contributions, and the best contribution I can do coming from Denmark is showing how Denmark can do it in a context in which everybody can then do it. That's my contribution. And I am not assuming that those political circumstances are there. I'm preparing myself for discussing it. That's how I see it. And it works both ways, as I mentioned already Monday morning. I mean, our job now is to be optimistic and provide courage, because if we can tell the politician how this can be done in an affordable, doable way and so on, and initiate and engage in discussion in which we can find those solutions also with local communities and neighbors and so on, then we also provide the courage for citizens to demand that the politicians will make these goals and stick to these goals. So that's the discussion I'm preparing myself for. It's not an assumption, it's something I'm eager to enter.
More questions? Here. Carla, and then was Goran, and then, well, Carla was first. Sorry. Zdravko, you will have to wait in a queue. Carla, and then Goran, and then Zdravko.
Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation, and also for it makes us also think. I was wondering, we heard about also the impact, right? Health impact, environmental impact, that you also calculate the CO2, no? Also balance. But I was wondering, are these impacts considered when you make your studies, or are there maybe, when you look at the optimal solutions? Of course, I remember the discussion, there is not only one optimal solution, you have to take a look at the others around.
Yeah.
Maybe are these impact assessments taken into account to constrain, let's say, as boundaries, the optimal solutions around which you look? This is my question.
Let me put it this way. Let me give you a straight answer to that to begin with. No, they are not embedded. Then again, they are maybe a little bit. But no, from the beginning, they are not embedded. And all the many things that Lone pointed out in her keynote a couple of days ago is not embedded in what we do here. Of course, as I mentioned, when we were proposing a lot of PV in our study, we already knew there will be some issues here with the fields and stuff, then that's why we put them on the roof and calculated how much that will cost. And so we also prepare ourselves. But from my view, and we can also ask, as Stefan did yesterday, should we then put all this assessment into one model? And very often you see people coming with an idea that we can make one global model of everything, and hard link it with Python and all this sort of things. I'm always skeptical about that. Not only I don't think it will be doable, and you'll completely lose what you're doing in that big model, but the main point for me is we need those discussions. So I need to discuss with Lone and Stefan and others and those neighbors. I need to discuss with them where should we put those PVs and all the other things. And we should not hide that discussion in a model. I can come with my view, Lone can add something, our GIS people and other things can add, and normal people can add their attitude and so on, and what they think and what they like and all that sort of thing, and then we can have a political discussion. And we should not avoid that political discussion, and we should not try to capture it into a model. That's my view on it. So I know that my model cannot do everything, but I think it's good that it doesn't do anything. Then we can discuss it.
Goran?
Goran Kajačić, University of Zagreb. Henrik, you said that there is a sense to put PVs on rooftop, but maybe there is also sense to put it in the desert. So if we look holistically from a global point of view, maybe there, we should produce fuels, electric fuels at the places where we have the most resources. And what is the impact of the imports, or, if we calculate them? Did you take this into account when you are looking to the modeling of the system?
I mean, two sides to that question. One is some of my colleagues that we collaborate with have made studies like that, also reaching the conclusion, yes, there are many places in the world, but there are also so affordable renewable energy sources in Denmark that we will also have a play there. That's one side. The other side, to what you say there, for now, we are in a state in which the problem is not that there are too many producers of this. That's not the problem right now. The problem is there's too few. I mean, they're next to none. So we have to develop this, and why should we not develop it in Denmark? And if we have big roofs enough for this, why should we not put PV on them?
Zdravko?
Yes. Zdravko Kravanev, University of Maribor, Slovenia. Thank you very much, Professor Lund, for this very inspiring lecture. I would like to make a comment first. I see this system approach that you talk about, holistic approach, really very important for the future. It is about the basic synthesis principle, saying that selection, linking, and the measuring of units should be done in order to maximize the overall performance of the system, not just by single units. So at the national scale or local scale, that is one thing. But the question then I have is, to which extent and to which feasibility this can be implemented or even extend to the continental or even global sphere in order to maximize the overall, let's say, transition of the world to the green society.
Yeah, I understand that, and I very much appreciate it. And I mean, the goal for all of us should be, at least that's what I'm searching in my analysis, to identify the best solution for everybody. And when we try to identify the Danish role or a role for a Danish municipality in doing that, then we always try to identify the level in which we should, for example, exchange electricity supply with grid connectors, as long as there's still a mutual benefit. But by the end of the day, there will be hours where there's no mutual benefit any longer, and we still have a problem, and then we should add. That's how we solve that and try to identify the good role of one unit in order to perform so the whole puzzle will be the best. That's what we achieve. Have we done it perfectly? I'm sure we haven't, but that's what we try, and then of course we can be better in the future.
Gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Eberhard Waffenschmidt from Cologne Institute for Renewable Energies, TH Cologne, and I have something between a remark and question. So I appreciate your holistic view, and I myself can already imagine how difficult an answer would be if someone asks you a specific question for one of these specific models. Yeah? But therefore, I know that this holistic view is very important. But to my opinion, we must avoid to have that holistic view only on the technical aspects. To my opinion, going for optimization technically of these systems, we will get a technical optimum, which maybe could be rather flat. Yeah? So, and if we consider also this, the consequences for the society, in total, we might be even better to have not the technical optimum, but something beside of it. Yeah? The question is whether we should import the renewable energy from places where they can be produced as cheap as possible, triggered me to that. Because if everybody can produce his own energy, also, it's different. Everybody can participate on this energy change. I know that this is very difficult to put into models, as we have learned in another presentation a few days. But do you have any idea whether we could implement that somehow to show decision makers how important that is?
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas. And your question is a little bit along the same lines as was asked before, and I guess my answer is still the same. There are certain things that I do not think we should embed in models. Something that we should debate where models and scientists can be part of the discussion, but normal people can also, and the politicians and industries and everybody can be part of that discussion. And we should not avoid that discussion. And sure, there are things in that discussion that I cannot put in my model, but I shouldn't put it in my model. I should come with scientific, valid inputs to how many PV do we need, where can we put them, and so on, and then we can debate it. And then we can make political decisions, all of us together in the parliament and the people and so on. Okay, in Denmark, for example, we would like to pay a little extra and then we put them on the roof instead of put them on the field. And maybe we will not build so many. We'll build a little fewer and then we'll build a little more offshore wind or something like that. That's political discussions where we can come with input. So I don't think we should put it in the models.
One more question, lady.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Josephine Lale. I'm from South Africa. And I was quite interested in your presentation because I'm just wondering, in terms of cost, do you think it is better to implement maybe this transition from what we've been using traditional methods in South Africa, mainly coal, to renewables through your normal procurement system where government is the main procurement person or the main funder, or would it be possible to do this through a public-private partnership, or would that increase the cost? Because I'm not too sure in terms of how you did your cost, because of usually when we suggest public-private partnership, we get resistance in terms of the cost.
Well, I absolutely understand that, and this can be a long answer, and it shouldn't, so I'll try to make it just short. I only talked a lot about some technical stuff. Of course, we also do economic analysis, and we also do business case analysis. But the way I always insist on working with this is to disregard all those regulations and business cases and interest rate in the beginning. Identify what is a least cost or a good solution for society, giving all these sort of things, discuss that, and then when we agree on that, for example, agree on if we should have the PVs on the house or where we should have them, then design the political rules so that this will happen. And that is also partly what is going on in this case in Denmark, for example. Right now, there's a lot of barriers for municipalities and others to put PV on the big roofs. And this is partly being changed now in the debate and what the parliament is going to do. Maybe it's not enough, but then we can discuss it again. But I always insist on keeping those things separate, because we should not do what is possible in the business, giving the certain the current regulation, if that is bad. We should identify what is good, and then we should change the rules and regulations and the interest rate and the bank in order to implement what is good.
Excellent. Shir, the last question, absolutely.
Thank you for this valuable presentation and contributions even before the world was speaking about climate neutral societies, and now in a time when we are in the era of climate neutral societies, and also definition of the smart energy system integration levels. I would like to ask, similar to how it is possible to show benefits to society based on cost decreasing from integration level to integration level up to the fifth one, what do you think about showing also the benefits to human health because of improved air quality as energy systems are more integrated and decarbonized, or to jobs? How would you see the possibility of also showing these benefits if possible? Thank you.
Yes, I think that's, of course, very important. And I don't think I should do it because I'm not an expert in doing it. We did it at some previous study. We actually included those costs, not calculated by me, but by calculated someone who knows better. And I think, again, I'm here to discuss. I put my facts on the table. I really enjoy and invite and wish that health experts will also put their numbers on the table so we get a better discussion with as many aspects as possible. But the most of what I have seen in that respect is very much in favor of not burning fossil fuels and instead going for the renewable.
Thank you very much, Henrik. A warm applause for Henrik. Thank you.